Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very thought-provoking show coming right up with special guest A.W. Barnes. And he's here today to share with us his new book, The Dark Eclipse, Reflections on Suicide and Absence. The Dark Eclipse is a book of personal essays in which author Dr. A.W. Barnes seeks to come to terms with the suicide of his older brother, Mike. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. A.W. Barnes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being on with you.
You know, what a pleasure it is to have you here. And, you know, it's so important to not only talk about your book and your story, but to really kind of go into, when we talk about mental health, suicide, I think it's a discussion that we can never talk about enough.
That's right. The book, I'm talking about my brother's suicides back in 1993, and what I've learned through my research is that, you know, suicide is one of the leading causes of death in this country, and we never talk about it. Certainly in my family, they never talk about the fact that my brother committed suicide, and I think in a lot of families that have people who committed suicide or friends have committed suicide, they don't talk about it because they feel ashamed, because there's embarrassment there. And when we need to get over that as a country so we can start talking and start helping people.
Yeah, really bring it out into the light and having these discussions. You know, I'm sure of our listeners, as they kind of review, they may know somebody that's had somebody that's committed suicide. I know in my family we had an uncle that did when I was a kid, but it was never talked about after that. It's like we heard about it and then that was it. And so I really applaud you for writing The Dark Eclipse, because I think it's important to have these discussions. And you were so open and honest and sharing about your personal story and your brother's suicide in this book. Are you finding that people are coming to you and sharing their stories as well?
Amazingly, yes. And people I've known for years and years and years who pretty know my story, but once they read the book, and strangers as well, they come up to me and they tell me their histories, the people they know who committed suicides, or things that have happened in their family that they never discussed. And I was really amazed that people would entrust their deepest secrets really to me. And I came to learn that as a writer and as a memoirist, that I have to be open to that people trust me because I have made myself vulnerable in this book, and they trust me to come tell their secrets to me, which I'm grateful that they do. But it has been an amazing reaction.
Yeah, I can imagine the kind of journey it's been. Well, and so when you decided it was time to write this book, was there a catalyst to this, or was it something that took some period of time getting together?
Well, my brother committed suicide back in 1993, and really I've been trying to write about it for 25 years, and I've written, I think, 3 other versions of this book which were totally different, and none of those worked, and so I got rid of them and started over. And what I think helped me write this book, and why this book became successful, is because I started by grounding it in facts. What I do in this book is that I look at the source documents around my brother's suicide, the police report, the autopsy, his suicide note, and a few other documents, so I can learn exactly what did happen, and then I can try to figure out why did he kill himself.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting, you know, in the book you share about, you know, your discussion with the police officer. How she was sharing about your brother Mike's passing. And, you know, I think a lot of people can probably relate to that, because it almost sounds like, the way you describe it, it feels like almost a surreal moment.
It was a surreal moment. What happened is that when my brother Mike committed suicide here in New York, my mother and father and I came here and to identify his body. And after identifying, we went to the police precinct where he committed suicide. He killed himself in a hotel in Times Square. And when we went to the police precinct, we went to gather his belongings, and when we entered, a policewoman grabbed me by the arm and took me into a room and put my parents in another room. And she took me there because she wanted to show me my brother's suicide note. And so she was the first one that gave it to me, and it was difficult to read. But when I read it, and as I was reading it, she said, this is a really good note. Your parents will love this note, which took me aback. It's a suicide note. And in this note, and this is one of the documents, and it's the document that I begin this book with, I reproduce it. And in this note, Mike disavows being gay, disavows his life, and wants nothing more than to go back to Indianapolis where we grew up and be married and have children. And I felt amazingly betrayed by this because we were gay brothers. And we had this, I thought, a kind of bond that we supported each other. And in the end, he kind of threw me under the bus. But the policewoman was right. My mother and father did find a lot of solace in this note. In fact, my father took this note and took it to our parish priest to demonstrate to our parish priest that my brother had repented in the end so that he could be buried in a Catholic cemetery, and my brother was.
It's interesting when you look at, how siblings may have some of the same experiences and some hardships, and some handle it different than others.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I concluded with this book. I thought I was writing this book really to primarily find out, why did Mike die? And what I ended up learning was, why did I survive? Because you're right, we did grow up in similar families. My family it's a very large family. There are 8 children, 7 boys, 1 girl. It's a conservative Catholic family. My father was a Trappist monk before he left the monastery and married my mother. So there was no real place for gay sons to grow up. And when I was a child, though, I was a middle boy, so I was the typical kind of moody middle boy, had lots of difficulties. But early on in my life, I had to learn to survive. My brother Mike, on the other hand, he was a straight A student. He was the prom king. He went to University of Notre Dame, Duke Law School, and became a lawyer on Wall Street. Mike was the 3rd oldest. He was 3.5 years older than I was, but he was the 3rd son down.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that, because, when we look at, siblings that have difficulties and they're going through situations, everyone's different. They handle things differently. And so when you came to this point where you realized that through the challenges that you've been in your personal life, you were perhaps a little bit more resilient.
Right.
What were you thinking about that as far as, your relationship with Mike and just, his experiences?
Well, this is what was interesting about my relationship with Mike. I thought we came out to each other as gay brothers when we were in our 20s. As gay brothers, we'd automatically be close together because we shared this part of our identity. And I thought that he would have a better understanding than anyone else in my family what I had to go through as a child, being a gay child in a very conservative family. But we didn't draw that close. We never sort of closed the gap between us. And I think that's because, first of all, he was an older brother. He was 3.5 years older than I was, and I worshipped him. I adored him. And I think that the difficulties that I had in forming relationships with my other brothers was also true with Mike. So the fact that we were gay didn't overcome the fact that we were brothers first.
Yeah, of course. Well, and it's interesting when you grow up in a large family. I mean, everyone's at different ages, going every which way. So sometimes it's difficult to make those real deep connections until later on in life. That's
right. And in any large family, our family is maybe not so unique, but there were 8 children born within 11 years. So we were really packed together tightly. But it's true in large families, we kind of separate off. So my 3 oldest brothers, which include Mike, they formed their own little family. And then I was in the middle with my sister, so we were close. And then I have 3 younger brothers who formed their own little family within that. So it was 3 different kind of families within one large family. And we did experience our childhoods differently.
Yeah, just with the different times. Well,
Yeah.
and as you look back and when you started kind of going down this path of writing this book, at what point did you realize, gosh, I think I need professional help with dealing with my brother's suicide?
Yeah, I had been seeing a therapist really for a while before Mike died, but also after Mike died, I needed help to figure out how to deal with this death. And suicide is such a violent way, a violent death, and violent not necessarily to the person who kills himself, but really for those of us who are left behind. It's so difficult to endure, and I knew that I couldn't figure this out on my own. So I did start seeing a therapist to help understand what was going on. And the therapist is actually quite helpful in the way this book was structured, because he did ask me at one point, have you ever seen the police report? And I thought, I didn't know there was a police report. Why would there be a police report? Well, of course there was. Did you ever see the autopsy? So he kind of helped me look at the facts of Mike's death in order for me to sort of construct the what-if questions around those facts. But it was tremendously helpful for me to see a therapist, which I should say, in my family, one does not do. I was one of the only people in my family that ever saw a therapist.
I think that goes for a lot of families. I know,
Yeah.
In many families, they're like, oh, you don't go to therapists, you keep, things
Right.
within the family kind of thing. There's this erroneous message, and I really applaud you because your book is very honest and open and vulnerable about all these things,
Right.
including seeing a therapist and making that discussion okay.
Yeah, and it is something that, along with talking about suicide, we also need to talk about therapy and going to therapists, and more important than that, especially I think for men, and I grew up in a family of all men, that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay if you can't figure out some part of your life. It's all right to be vulnerable and to go ask for help if you can't find help among your friends or your family. It's okay to go to a professional, and we have a hard time doing that, and we need to get over ourselves, and we need to seek help when we need it.
Mm-hmm. And not be afraid to show that emotion.
That's right.
Really kind of show people. Well, and in your book, I mean, you have such honesty, the way that you wrote The Dark Eclipse. Was that your intention throughout the book?
People have asked me that before, and people have told me that I'm courageous to write this way and that I'm very vulnerable and open. But I never felt that way, only because I've always been this way. Even as a small child, I was emotive. Even I was the one that always expressed my feelings, which was odd to my family because we didn't do that. So I was this odd child. It's like, why are you being so emotional here? This doesn't work. So for me, part of it was natural. But I also had to realize that in order for this book to be successful, it couldn't be just about Mike. I had to put myself on the line as well and talk about when I was in my teens and 20s, I had suicide attempts. I sought help after them. But I had to be honest with my readers and say, yeah, I've been there. When I was very, very young, I was sexualized when I was a very young boy. And that can be embarrassing, but I had to trust that my readers would take that vulnerability and be okay with it in order to show I had a tough childhood, but I survived this childhood, first of all, by seeking help, but also by learning to talk about it, by learning to be vulnerable, and being okay with emotions, even if they're very uncomfortable emotions.
As you were writing this book, what were some of the things you discovered about yourself?
That's a good question. No one's asked me that question. I think part of it is that in the book I talk about as well. When I was a boy, I wrote my first story, and we come from businessmen and women. We don't do art. We don't do. That's a hobby. Right. So I remember when I was a boy, probably 6 or 7, I wrote a story, then I crumbled it up thinking, I can't be a writer. Who am I? So it's taken me a long time to accept and to embrace that mantle of being a writer. So yeah, I'm a writer, and this part of this book kind of proved it to me. That yeah, you can make the claim to say, Andy, you're a writer, and that was something that I needed, that affirmation, and that this book helped me to do that.
That's so important for people to hear, because how often do we hear those kind of things? When I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist, and I was told artists don't make money. We're not
right.
Better find something else.
Well, we're all told that, and I work in an art and design school in New York, and the kids here are amazing, but they have a lot of pressure not only from their family but from society. Says artists, they don't make livings. Artists aren't that important. But on the contrary, artists and writers, especially during very difficult times, are extremely important to us as people and as a society.
Without a doubt. That's without a doubt. And what great encouragement for our listeners to hear if they're thinking about going into those as career choices, just
right.
Think that, within your book and, obviously through your life as well, you've shown people how being authentic really is the path to happiness regardless of what's going on.
And that's true, and I think that the other thing I wanted to do with this book is that I grew up in a very toxic environment for me, and that environment is still toxic for me when I go back. But what I had to learn is that in order to survive, in order to thrive, which I'm doing today, I had to remove myself from that toxic environment. And if your listeners, and if my readers, if they're in those toxic environments, they have to start thinking about how to change, how to get out of there. Sometimes it may be simple, a quick, I just need to leave. Sometimes it may be a plan that I need to change my environment in order to be healthy. And I hope that my book shows the way in which I did this as well.
And another great important message, because a lot of times people think, well, they're my family, I should really, stick with them all the time. And
right.
It could be a really toxic situation where maybe the healthiest thing is to create some distance.
And that's what I've done. And I'm still friendly with my family. I go home every once in a while. I'm very close to my mother still. I talk to my father still. But what I've done is that I have put boundaries around my interactions with my family so that I allow them to have access to part of my life, but not all of my life. For example, I don't know that my family knows that I've written this book, because I didn't consult them. I didn't tell them, because my writing life I keep separate from them. And that's part of how I've learned to still stay engaged with my family, but to remove myself from that toxicity.
Yeah. Well, and it really is your honest journey that you went through and with your brother. And you talk about in your book how your therapist suggested that you go and get the police report and, and look at that. And while you were doing that kind of research and looking for that information, do you feel like you were reliving, being told about his suicide all over?
That was the hardest part about writing this book, is that when I went back to the police station to get the police report, it was the same station, so I had to relive what happened there. When I went back to the morgue to get the autopsy, I had to relive being there and waiting for the medical examiner to come in to show us a Polaroid of Mike's face. We didn't get to see his body, but she showed us a Polaroid to identify. So that was difficult to have to tap back into those feelings and to realize after all these years they were still very strong and they were very difficult. But that was part of the journey I knew I had to make in order to make this book successful. And
as well as also get to a place of healing.
That's right.
Never fully heal, but I know our hearts kind of break apart when things like this happen.
Well, that is part of it. And, the book, the subtitle of this book is Reflections on Suicide and Absence. And really the absence part of that is just the remainder of that loss that I carry with me, and I'll carry with me forever. But that absence, it's less biting, it's less difficult than that initial loss that pain of loss. And that's what I kind of meant in the subtitles. How do we come to a point where we are okay living with the absence of someone we loved who killed themselves?
Do you ever feel that there's some type of closure that happens when suicide happens?
That's a good question. That's so difficult because suicide it's so inexplicable. If a relative has an illness and they die, you have time to process. But a suicide is so sudden, it's so violent, and closure seems impossible. And in writing this book, as I said earlier, that I thought I might get understanding why he did it, but I can never get to that understanding, I've realized. I can get close to it. I can make a lot of assumptions and hypotheses, but I can never know exactly why did he do this. And that's difficult. That's difficult to carry with oneself, and I think that's what I'm left with.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so what are some of the things that you would like readers to take away from your book?
I think the first one, for readers and for your listeners, if someone is in trouble, if someone is thinking of suicide, if someone has put a plan in place, to get help, to reach out to, there's a National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and the number is 1-800-273-TALK. And as important, if you know someone who seems suicidal, who has expressed desires to kill themselves, it's important that you talk to them, that you be in contact with them. Because what we do know is that many people commit suicide because they feel lonely and unloved. But if you're talking to those friends of yours or family members who you suspect on a regular basis, just to check in, just to say, hey, how are you today? That's tremendously helpful. And I hope we'll get that from my book, and also that we do need to talk about suicide.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I mean, it's interesting because people do get in this place where they feel like they're all by themselves and there's no one to turn to, no one understands. And so they're in this, and a lot of times it's a misperception of loneliness because there are so many people that really care about them. And, reaching out and talking, and thank you for sharing the National Suicide Hotline. I'm so glad that you did that. We're going to actually have the number listed below as well.
Excellent. I think, in this book, this is one of my biggest regrets, and this is the regret I take with me and I carry with me, burden, that my brother Mike, my gay brother Mike, in the end, he couldn't reach out to me. He didn't call me. He didn't say, hey, I need help. And I think that's the biggest regret I had and the biggest question is, why? Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you just pick up the phone and say, hey, I need help?
Yeah. Well, I know just from my experience having to deal with people that I've known or family members that have committed suicide, or friends that have had to deal with it, sometimes the loneliness is just so isolating that there's not that phone call. And so, you probably get a lot of people reaching out to you as well going, I feel like I have such tremendous guilt from this.
Right.
Nothing that we could do, right?
That's exactly right. And there is nothing I could have done because he chose not to reach out to me. And if there were clues, I didn't see them. And my brother Mike was very good about presenting himself as the perfect person. That's what he was taught, right? So he was very good about covering over his feelings, masking his feelings, and presenting a face that seemed perfectly fine. So there were no clues for me to pick up. So sometimes, I beat myself up thinking, why didn't I help? But on the other hand, I didn't know.
It's usually how it goes. Well, I felt that your book, The Dark Eclipse, is it's a heart-wrenching but important read as well. I think our listeners and readers will get a lot from reading your book. Where can people connect with you and be part of your community and learn about the other publications that you have?
Sure. I have a website. It's called drawbarnes.com. That's DR as in doctor, AW, Barnes.com.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for talking about this issue and allowing me to have a voice in it.
Well, thank you for being here today with us and for sharing your book, The Dark Eclipse, with us. Again, if you would like to connect with Dr. A.W. Barnes, you can at his website, drawbarnes.com, and we'll have the link below. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.